Hello, everyone. Hi. Happy Tuesday. So excited to have y'all here. We have a lot of people joining from different locations, so feel free to send your location in the chat. I'm so happy we can all be here today. We have the amazing Ali joining us. I'll just invite her to stage real quick. Yeah, and we'll go ahead and get started. Amazing. Hi.
Hey, everybody.
Hi, how are you today?
I am great. I am starting today off with a little bit of technical difficulties, so it's kind of funny that we'll be talking about the joy of remote work when sometimes virtual devices can give you so much pain. But we're here to talk about all of the challenges and how you get around it. So I did it. I'm here. And I'm ready.
Amazing. Amazing. We're so happy you made it. It seems like a lot of us had technical difficulties. Sometimes it's just not the day, but yeah, hopefully everything will work out for the best. So let's get to it. Today we have an amazing topic, and it's actually a topic we've been talking a lot in our people circles, and also a discussion I had with Ali, who's our host here today, and our guest speaker. So I'm really happy that she decided to accept the invitation to join me today for a conversation about remote team leadership and what does that look like in people first teams. Before we'll give you a quick introduction, I would just like to say a few groundkeeping rules. Today is mostly a panel talk, so it'll be kind of an open conversation, and please feel free to have a discussion with us in the chat. We'll monitor everything. We'll answer questions as we go, and we'll try to answer more questions at the end. We also have some time for networking after this event. If you feel like talking to Ali, to me, or anyone else from the audience, we'll have those networking tables open again. And this session is recorded. So if you are short on time today and you have to run early, or if you then want to rewatch, we'll definitely send you the recording. So just wanted to share this out there to make sure, that nobody misses anything. And as some of you know, today's webinar is organized by our company Gather. We are a project management tool for people ops teams and for people first teams that live in Slack. All right, let's get to it. As I said, today on the stage, we have the amazing Ali Greene. Ali, would you like to give us a little introduction about yourself?
Sure. Hey, everybody. I noticed someone in the chat, Lindsay, is from Michigan. That is where I am originally from. I'm currently, however, living in Spain in a small town near Valencia. So how did I get from Michigan to Spain? Well, mainly it's because of remote work. I had been working remotely since 2014. I was working in an HR function in advertising in New York City, decided to leave everything for seek of adventure. And adventure I found is the director of people for a company called DuckDuckGo, where I spent about 4.5 years traveling the world full time while helping develop the team. The company tripled in size during my time there. I left that role to continue my personal mission of helping not just one company get great at remote work, but many companies get great at remote work. And so for the past year, I've been consulting various businesses on their remote work policies and procedures. And I'm now currently co-authoring a book that will be coming out soon that will help the everyday manager and their teams learn how to be effective and engaged and excited about working remotely and not all of this crazy work from home stuff that's been going on during the pandemic this past year.
Amazing. A great introduction. And again, I'm so happy that you could join us today with your experience as, being remote for so long and working with remote teams, and building those policies. I think we'll have a lot of great insights to share.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So thank you for that. And a quick introduction for myself, as I'll be on the stage today with Ali. I'm currently the head of people and community at Gather, and I've been in people ops for the last 9 years, going from a recruiter role to an HR manager role to a people ops role. So it's been great to sort of watch that transition happen. And I'm also a founder of a startup community here in Europe where I live. So really excited to be here. All right, let's get to it. Today's topic, as I mentioned, we'll be talking about, what does leadership look like in this current state of the world? And, what do you as a people leader or as a founder, or as, someone on the, taking on the leadership role in the company do to make sure that you have a great employee experience, that your teams feel safe at work, and, that they are encouraged, empowered. So that's what we'll be talking about today. And we'll have a few different topics we'll cover together with Ali. So to make sure that we don't lose our train of thought, and that we have a few, main bullet points for you to kind of grab on. We'll share slides back and forward between our conversation to always cover the main points that we're talking about. So Ali, let's kick things off with the state of remote, right? What do you feel like is the current state of the world out there in terms of remote work? What's the mood like?
Yeah, I love this question. You're starting to see, I think, a lot of tension between people that are really enjoying their remote working experience and those who are not, as well as employees and managers or leadership of companies. And I think there's a lot of reason why this tension exists. And I think it has to do with this past year being not work is normal. So even those of us who have been remote work advocates from the get-go, we're struggling and we're frustrating because we're not getting the same benefits of what a remote work and therefore a flexible lifestyle can offer. And so people that have only been working from home for the past 18 months may not have fully recognized what these benefits are and how it can impact them and their lifestyle. And so they're missing, the benefits that they saw in an office environment. On the flip side to that, managers weren't necessarily prepared for leading in a remote team and don't know how to provide their teams and their employees with the right circumstances to allow for these benefits to really shine through. And so we're starting to see a lot of trends pop up, a lot of conversations around, what does return to work look like? And it's, well, hey, we've been working for the past 18 months. Nobody's taken an 18-month vacation. Maybe some people have, but return to work already or return to office is pigeonholing a situation that companies may want to have happen because they haven't put in the effort to make remote work shine. On the flip side of that, you're seeing a lot of trends around hybrid and what hybrid means and what does that look like for organizations? And I am a huge advocate that I think a hybrid strategy is a real estate strategy. If you're going to be a hybrid company, you need to have a remote first approach to leadership and thinking about your people in a remote first way. And so those are some of the things that we're going to talk about. But by and large, I think you're seeing that employees want the flexibility. They want the autonomy to own their remote work schedules. And managers are struggling. They're the ones that are facing the most challenges because they don't know how to support their teams. And also many of them are learning how to do this as individuals for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there has been such a huge challenge, and there are a few areas that you pointed out that I absolutely agree with. I think the manager experience overall has become that much harder, right? Especially if you were not used to the remote environment in the first place, and secondly, kind of the overall relationship building and communication flow in the company, right? As you mentioned, you need to. Even if you are a hybrid company, you need to have the remote first principles in the way you talk to your team and in the way you share information, just because, everybody needs to sort of have access to the same amount of information, and don't get me started on onboarding and all these things. So I think it'll be a really, really, really great discussion. So let's, before we dive into the different topics, let's talk about, I thought it would be great on the start of the talk to point out some of the challenges that we have been facing and kind of just summarize them up, what you have seen mostly happening on the market. So, what are the most common challenges of remote teams currently?
Yeah, so you already mentioned one of them, which is by and far, how do we communicate? How do we collaborate with people remotely? I think back to one of the first pieces of advice I had in my first office role, which was if somebody's not getting you the deliverables you need, why don't you just pop by their desk and say hi and like ask for that information? And looking back, like that was terrible advice. That's letting people not be accountable to setting expectations. And so in remote work, it's not just about communication and collaboration. It's, finding the right ways, the methodologies, the tools to communicate and collaborate, but also like setting the expectations around what good behavior looks like. So definitely that. I think because of that, people are seeing things like recreating the office in a remote environment. So communication and collaboration, we don't know how to do that remotely. We're not good at it. Also, there's all of these statistics and information about people feeling more lonely and more isolated at home. And so I think managers immediately think, okay, well, let's have more meetings. So meetings, people won't be isolated. They'll have opportunities to communicate with each other. Like we're going to talk, things are going to be great. And then you get Zoom fatigue, and then you get employees burning out because they don't know when to shut down their computer. They have nothing else to do all day if they're still in places that are facing strict quarantines. So people are working harder and longer and more productive and in a silo more than ever before. And so I think that, overwork, that burnout stems from this idea of what are our communication and collaboration challenges and how do we prevent isolation in a healthy way?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think that you summarized it amazingly. And I think, then looking at this, and I'm pretty sure we can all agree that all of these three challenges we've listed are very true. I think that then that has to be, your priority when you are the leadership team. How do we tackle these challenges before we actually add on more activities, more possibilities, more room for other challenges as well, right? So yeah, I think it was great to kind of list them out. And following on challenges and, maybe some of the missteps, what do you think are some of the biggest missteps or even mistakes leadership teams make in terms of the remote leadership as a whole?
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, it's looking at all of these challenges on a wide scale. And what I love about how, Clara, you and I had many conversations leading up to this presentation, and a statistic I just ran across for the first time while preparing a little bit for today was Buffer's State of Remote Work in 2021. And their top three things were the things that we said. And so it's not just like people in the community that are seeing these problems. Like from a quantitative standpoint, you're seeing these problems. And I think the reason for it, why are people not able to unplug? Why are people having difficulty collaborating and communicating? Why are people being lonely? Well, it's because there's mistakes going on at the manager level. And that's not to say that these managers are bad managers. I think Danny in the chat said this really well, that managers are learning how to be managers and now they have to learn how to manage remote workers. And so I think that unfortunately, it's not a conscious thing going on, but managers aren't leading in an effective way for the remote environment. And specifically where I see managers having challenges are challenges with really making tough decisions from a prioritization standpoint. So that's a big mistake with remote work. If there's too much going on in someone's world and you don't have the usual ways of seeing if someone's stressed out at their desk, of seeing if someone's coming in early and staying late every day, how are you keeping tabs on the wellness of your employees? How are you making sure that they are being productive? And potentially there's too much on someone's plate because they're not prioritizing, they don't know how to ask for help, or there's too much context switching. And so they're context switching on all these different projects while learning how to work remotely, and it's hard for anyone to keep up. So first and foremost, I think prioritization within organizations is something that needs to be re-looked at moving forward. Number two, I think, is a failure of setting expectations. I think every conflict in life, and this is something funny that I have a colleague that used to laugh at me about saying this all the time, but I think it's true to this day. Every conflict in life is because of mismatched expectations. So if you're not sure how to set expectations around when are you working, when are you on your computer, how fast should you respond to someone in Slack, when should something be in Slack versus in Asana or Monday or Notion, if you're not setting these expectations, people are going to go bonkers and frustrated about the work. And then if they're frustrated about the work, how can they get the work done, nevertheless connect with their colleagues? So I think we're already setting people up to fail by not teaching them how to set these expectations. And all of that to say, the third thing is managers are just like people. They're figuring out things a step of the way with their employees. But unfortunately, that means they're not taking action. And so certain employees don't have these good role models to look up to see what kind of behavior should I mimic in the organization to be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. There is so much to be done. So I'm so glad we got to run through some of these like biggest areas for improvement, basically, right? From not only from making sure your team knows what to expect, but your employees, your managers, basically everyone in the company. I think that's a huge gap, and we'll definitely cover a way how to actually tackle this in today's talk. Yeah, so I think we're ready to dive in. So let's talk about our first big topic, which is how to set up the remote collaboration for people first teams, right? So going back to one of the biggest mistakes or biggest challenges in remote teams, which was sort of what are the ground rules for collaboration, and how do you communicate in teams? I think this will be a really great topic to talk about. So Ali, what do you feel like are kind of the biggest what are some of the like biggest pillars of success for remote collaboration, right? We listed that as one of the biggest challenge of remote. So, what are the main pillars here?
Yeah, so I think each of the pillars kind of stems so far from the challenges that we talked about. I think people need easy to use frameworks. If something is too complicated, it's not going to get the appropriate level of buy-in needed for people to build new habits, which is essentially what we're asking people to do, is to unlearn what it meant to be a successful employee in an office and to relearn what it means to be a successful remote worker, which means oftentimes reliance on asynchronous communication, reliance on clear documentation, strong written communication skills. And those are things that can be taught, but not everybody has them. And so to get rid of the work about work and make things overly complicated is going to be even more detrimental to people. And so I think having easy to use frameworks is very important. Working from a mindset of top priorities, I think helps with the prioritization problem. If there's one thing that you need to get done every week and you can just focus on that one thing and get into your flow and have your creative energy be at its best, it'll help the organization, it'll help your team, it'll help the people. And, I can't say this enough times, but managers modeling good behavior. So if you're going to require or ask that all of your employees give a weekly update of where their projects are at the end of the week, you should be right there with them doing it first and showing how, your projects went. And also that gives an opportunity for managers to share their vulnerability. Hey, I realized I bit off more than I could chew this week. My top priority was X. I realized X is a really large priority. It shouldn't have been broken up in A, B, and C. And this is what I learned for next week. And so learning those lessons alongside of your team and being very transparent, I think will continue to build trust in remote teams.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So to quickly summarize that up, first, the biggest pillar I think we've talked about is, aligning your team, making sure that everybody understands, this is a priority for us. We want to solve for this issue, right? We want to collaborate better, understand each other better and more clear. But, the second piece you mentioned around setting expectations, I think is a huge one, right? Because if you're not sure what's expected of you and you are in a remote environment and you don't really actually have anyone to sort of copy, right? You don't have your colleagues to look at to see what time they go for lunch, what time they go from work, right? How they solve problems, because you are basically sitting alone in a room, right? Unless you're in a co-working space, but very likely you are not with your colleagues. So it's really hard to understand what sort of behavior habits and, work is expected of you. So absolutely agree. And you mentioned the feedback loops a little, and I think we'll deep dive deeper on those as well. But I just wanted to pointed out that having those clear feedback loops, and as you mentioned, like easy to use frameworks that anyone can adapt, that's really, really important to make sure that, everything gets back to the leadership, and leadership knows what's happening in the company. And talking about, what if you get feedback, and if you run these feedback loops and you collect feedback on a regular basis, I think one of the most important things about feedback is actually, taking action on the feedback you're given, right? And taking action on making sure that your collaboration is set up well. So what does that look like to you, Ali? What does, the taking action piece about remote collaboration look like to you?
Yeah. And just responding real quickly, I know that the slides are a bit blurry for everybody. So I wanted to point that out.
So they're hard to read.
Hard to read, but I know that we're recording this, and potentially we can jot down some of these highlights for the group afterwards. But for all of you out there listening, the slides are good, but our chat's better. So hopefully we'll just continue to make it exciting for y'all. And so taking action, what that looks like to me, and we've talked about this a few times, but I think the repetition in this is important, because people think that there's all of these crazy like plugins and really fun technology, and there is, and you can use all that stuff. But being a great remote team and being great at remote leadership is about returning back to the basics. And so you need those building blocks in order to take action. And so if you think about it, like, okay, we've talked about setting expectations. I think there was a question in here around, like, what does that look like? Do you have a tool or a guideline to set expectations? But taking action could simply mean, before you even find a tool or have some sort of guidelines for setting expectations, you just do like the MVP of what works for your company. So I collaborate with my co-author actually on WhatsApp. And the way that we set expectations and take action with each other is in a WhatsApp text by 8 p.m. Central European time every Monday. We chat in WhatsApp around like what our top priority is, when we want to focus the most on our book, in case there's a certain day where both of us choose to focus at the same time, and we can have that synchronicity in brainstorming together, and like where we need help. I've done something very similar and a lot more built up in Asana, where every day we had a meeting, and asynchronously people put in, this is my top priority, these are my hours available. I've done the same thing in Slack and just pinned the message until the next week when we could review it. So again, I think the content can reach the tool. The tool doesn't need to reach the content. So taking action in that way is creating these frameworks. A framework could be as simple as, these are the 3 questions that people need to answer on Slack every Monday by 5 p.m. Eastern time. That's easy enough to use. You can eventually build it out more, but why? What's the simplest way of having a mental model of saying, okay, these are the basic things that we need to know? And so I think once you start thinking about that, you can already see how it fits into your organization. Because another problem with, all of this literature about remote work that's coming out is there might be something really cool that a company's doing, but it only exists in Slack. And what if your company doesn't use Slack? Then what are you supposed to do? And so I think taking the ideas and implementing them in the way that you operate is a form of taking action. Furthermore, I think, again, we talked about this, like the top priority mindset is really quite important in terms of having everybody, and I think this should come from the employee up, not the manager down, but what is the most important thing you could work on this week that would push us forward based on what our team goals are, what our company objectives are, and then having them commit to it by writing it down, leaving it documented somewhere. Not only does it add transparency to the team, people know what you're working on and they can offer help or insight, but it does help you have accountability, which I think is a skill set that people need to learn, self-accountability, the longer they work remotely. And I think we had some other points on taking action to share some stories about that. would be good to jump into, but it's also a little bit blurry for me. So I'm gonna leave it to you to prompt us
Yeah,
on.
yeah. Sorry about the blurry slides. I read in the chat that a few of our folks refreshed their screen and it got all good for them. The third point we had here was, managers constantly modeling good behavior, and that is also a great way to take action, because if an employee is onboarding or basically learning a new behavior, such as transferring to a remote environment, or just even, when you're implementing new company values, new policies, etc., right? If you have managers sort of leading the way and modeling the expected behavior, that is a great way to take action, and how to understand that that's happening. Again, I think feedback can step in here, to tell you, if the adaptation has been well. What I loved about your example, Ali, what you mentioned is how you sync with your co-founder, and kind of the little framework you have set up for yourself, to make sure that you sort of do an async check-in together. How did you come to that, to that sort of schedule? Because I think it's very interesting, and a lot of teams are just trying to figure this out, right? Was it kind of an experiment and it worked out? How did you figure out what's the best way for you to sync?
Yeah, so both of us had a lot of remote experience before the pandemic. My co-author used to work at Automatic. I used to work at DuckDuckGo. And at DuckDuckGo, we had a very extensive model of working on templates in Asana. And so all of the things that we said, we had very, built out versions of that we spent years building. And so a lot of it was, very clear. This is the list of expectations based off of what level you are in the organization. And here's the list of expectations, even to the point of every Friday, you should leave a project update. And every quarter, you should have a mid-mortem on your company objectives and talk about them. And so there are already these good behaviors that you can generalize and pull out of remote work companies that work really well. And I think taking time to reflect is one of them. I think having a clear way of documenting things, both in a fast-paced way, but then leaving that documentation long-standing so you can go back and say, how could we have made the past few months better or more efficient? I think both have different uses. And so first was taking a step back and saying, what are the ways that we want to communicate with each other? And these are the simple rules I think you can use to discuss any expectations around communication and collaboration. It's one, what are the reasons we need to communicate? Well, we should communicate with each other to just keep each other in the loop of what we're working on. This has a few different functions. One, it makes us excited about the project and it makes us re-energized to do our work when we sit down and do it. So there's a motivational aspect to it. Two is we're communicating with someone who's in the same boat as us and trying to work on the same goal. So those feelings of isolation go away because we're attached to the same goal. We need to work together to make it happen. Three is accountability. We don't have deadlines coming from any other managers or companies. It's ours. And so at the most extreme, it's if we don't hit this deadline, nothing's going to happen to us, but we're not going to reach our personal goals. And so being able to commit to something by writing it down gives you that accountability. So then you see okay, those are the three reasons I need to communicate. We need to know that pretty fast just so we can have a quick conversation about it if we are not aligned on our goals. So if my co-author says, I'm going to spend this week, redoing our LinkedIn page. And I'm well, actually, I think that we should try to write 2 more chapters so we can send them to our editor because that's going to need some weeks. And so let's focus on that first. It gives us an opportunity to talk about differences. So it needs to happen in real time. In real time, how do we communicate? Well, we've been friends for many years, so it's WhatsApp in this case. For a company, it might be Slack. But it also needs to be longstanding. So at the end of every week and every month, we can kind of go back and track our progress and learn things about ourselves and each other. When were we most efficient? When were we not? And so we also then, I'm almost embarrassed, but I'm not embarrassed to share the tools that we use because they're so simple. We do this on a Google Doc form that's literally things about the book, things about the business, miscellaneous, things that are Ali's responsibilities, things that are Tam's responsibilities, things that are shared responsibilities. It's a grid. We fill it out and each week there's a new one. And it's as basic as that. And then that's really the simple framework that we needed to succeed. I've worked in organizations as a consultant that have built out customized templates in Notion. And so let's say you were building a content campaign for marketing. Literally, you just went into a calendar, opened up a new Notion page and selected, is it like micro content? Is it a blog post? And depending on what it was, a new template would pop out. I think that's an incredibly sophisticated way of reaching the same goal, which is there should always be a set of information that's the same so people don't have to overthink what they're looking at in order to move forward in working remotely.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think a lot of people don't say this, but your initial responsibility as a leader in a company is to make sure everybody knows what to do, right? And if you don't share that, if it's somewhere in your head or if it's not written down, if it's not shared with the team, if it's not repeated, not prioritized, that can become an issue. So,
and it's a fine balance between not being a micromanager and encouraging people to proactively document things, and that it's going to be useful for everybody because you get feedback on your work, you get support, you get an opportunity to set boundaries for people. And so I think this is going to be the next step of remote work. In an office, you're just expected to be on from like 9 to 5. Like that's when your brain is supposed to work best. Like we all know that's not true. Like how many people listening right now, like when they're in university or something, would cram last minute for an exam and stay up and pull all-nighters. Like they just get energy from that style of work. So I think for remote leaders, if they can proactively think of ways to get this information out instead of asking for it, the more their team can realize that they have trust, they have autonomy, they can create these flexible schedules. There's just these asynchronous check-ins that allow everybody to regroup and be on the same page, and offers an area for collaboration and questioning, and an area of, just that, that like, are we actually getting the work done? Are we progressing towards a goal? And all of these things can be super lightweight, but if they're implemented in a formalized process, it doesn't feel like your manager's just signing on to Slack every day. Hey, what are you working on today? Like, oh, are you sitting down yet? Because they already know. And then you can be left alone unless you want to chat for fun or unless you need help. And that's when proactively employees start learning, hey, I've been spinning my wheels for too long. This is a waste of my time and energy. I need to get someone else involved.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love how all of these things sort of like connect with what we were saying before, right? How does your team know that they are expected just to sort of, report async what they're working on and prioritize because you align with them and you set the expectations, right? So it's kind of like this amazing culture that you create, and actually speaking of culture, that's our next topic that we'll discuss. So, talking about creating this culture of people first remote work, and what does that even mean? One of the first things or a few things we mentioned already is sharing feedback, and you mentioned that creating these little frameworks is extremely helpful, but how do you set these powerful feedback loops that actually get the management, get listened to, get heard, and get taken action on? How do you set these up?
Yeah, so I think there's feedback can mean a lot of different things in different ways. So obviously there's your own personal feedback to how you've approached a project or a task. What stressors and triggers did you let affect your work? Where did your strength shine through? Things of that nature. I think there's then also like feedback on the work itself. Like, did you do whatever the definition of done is? Were you able to hit success metrics? And then there's feedback in terms of your own feedback towards yourself, which I think is something that gets overlooked quite often. But like, what did you learn about yourself? What kind of self-awareness did you gather? Did you enjoy the work? Did you not enjoy the work? And so creating opportunities for those feedback loops, I think can happen in lots of ways. Things that I've seen successful in the past was standardized postmortems. And this is something that we really prided ourselves on during my time at DuckDuckGo, which was anytime any project finished, even if it was a project that just like was amazing and easy and nothing bad happened, we would still have a postmortem. And this allowed us time, both asynchronously and synchronously, because the meeting agenda had to be prepared in advance. And it was templatized with like what went well, what didn't go well, what were my key learnings. It gave everyone a chance to have that pause. And I think pause is incredibly important in organizations. When you finish a project, before you ramp up and jump right back into the next set of work, take a moment to breathe. It lets you digest everything. I think it can really help with periods of stress and burnout, because once you have that high energy and that momentum, taking a break to rest is really important and reset, your energy, what you're thinking about, what perceptions you're getting from the outside world that can help you. That pause also gives you time to have critical feedback and to have it not feel personal, because you've celebrated the end of the project. And then the next step is like, okay, like the project was awesome. We did well. What could have gone better in the work? And what could have gone better in how you handled that project? Let's say you're someone who very much is a great communicator, but not very organized. And so you were able to do project updates that were awesome. People enjoyed reading them. They got value. They knew what was going on in the project, but you didn't consistently post them. So then you would be able to say, oh, people were really engaged with our project, but I missed a few weeks here and there. And so next time I know I need to be more consistent with my work. And so it just allows you to see what are all the puzzle pieces missing for what I need next. So absolutely. I think postmortems, they're so important, and people think, maybe they're boring or they're scary, they're intimidating, but I think it's just great to say like, oh, even this, I liked this about the project, but I didn't like that, can be really good to learn about yourself. And then also finding ways for the work itself to give you feedback, so you don't have to rely on people for feedback, is really important. And so I think about like, I'm going to give a people ops example because, so much of my life has been in people ops. But if I wrote a new job description for the first time, we've never hired this role before. So like the first time we hired a senior manager of marketing, for example. I wrote the job post, I talked to the team, got excited about it. Like, okay, are we describing accurately the responsibilities? Are we describing accurately the expectations of skills that we have? Go post the job, wait for all these great people to apply. Well, are the right people applying? Are we getting enough applicants? Do the applicants have enough like senior level of experience that they would be in that position or not? And if we're disappointed by all the candidates coming in, it's not the fault of the candidates, it's our fault, because obviously the work itself is giving us feedback that there's a miscommunication between what we're looking for and what candidates are seeing that are encouraging them to apply. And I see this happen a lot with developers and engineers. Their code works or it doesn't work. Like if it doesn't work, where's the bug? How can they fix it? Designers, if they put something up on like a UI testing website and people vote for mockup A, but not mockup B, they know A has the qualities you're looking for. And so what I think is really great, if managers can help coach their employees for identifying what those things are up front. So at the beginning of your project to do that task so you can have the feedback in real time instead of waiting for the end, launching mockup B, realizing it's not working, and then having to go back and do mockup A. You could just, add in a step of feedback loop in your work itself. And then asynchronous check-ins, we've talked about tons, and some of the benefits of it from expectation setting. But I think there's also a benefit of it from a feedback standpoint, because it's an opportunity to ask for feedback and ask for help. So within your check-in, it's not just things we've already talked about. This is when I'm available. This is not when I'm available. This is my top priority. This is something I would like feedback on, or this is something I'm struggling with. And it can just be another question in that, weekly sort of asynchronous stand-up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, coming back to let the work give you feedback, which I think is actually so important to listen to your work. I feel like a lot of employees are actually afraid to listen to that feedback, right? Because they might be afraid that they've done something wrong. So if you are creating a people first culture, and setting up these feedback loops to set the expectations that it's okay if things go wrong, it's extremely important for you to listen to the feedback and iterate, and try again. I think that's the sort of culture you want to promote, right? In terms of like having these healthy feedback loops and, again, setting the expectations for your teams not to be afraid to embrace failure and, to learn from the mistakes, whether you get a feedback from a colleague or feedback from your work. So Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And I think because in a remote environment, you might not necessarily get to pick up on the subtleties of people's personality early on. The more awareness that people can start developing around what feedback is actually quite motivating to them and what feedback could be potential triggers for them, and sharing that with their team so that they can respond appropriately, could be really useful. For example, like, hey, I would appreciate on the asynchronous check-in that you give me my feedback via a DM versus, hey, you can just throw that on the thread. Those are subtleties that are good to know and start learning about what works on the team. I think feedback can be so scary because in traditional organizations, it's really tied to performance management. And, if you're not always getting positive feedback, then you may not get promoted. Why I think it's important to cultivate a culture of feedback in a remote environment is because there's not a lot of informal opportunities to casually just pull someone aside in the hallway and share some feedback that's meant from a good place of learning and growth. And so if you can really put that as an intentional piece of your culture, it can remove that fear. And so, as you said, it's not about making the mistake or failing at something. It's how do you react to that? Did you learn that new skill? Were you able to take that feedback and make something more successful the next time? That, I think, is more impressive than someone who never pushes themselves to the point of failure, because it means that they're not being innovative, they're not challenging themselves. And so how would you confidently in a remote environment promote someone who potentially is always acting within their safety box instead of, giving them the support to say, we actually want to challenge you and push you. So you're going to work on this project. I know it's slightly out of your means. Here are the resources we can offer for help. And we're purposely going to have a postmortem to give you feedback on this so that you can take on even bigger or more challenging or more exciting things in the future.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm so happy we got here because we have a question in the chat from Danny, and the question is very close to this field. So here it goes. How does performance management strategies or expectations shift with a remote work culture?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I'm going to start with expectations and then go to performance management. So I think the biggest difference we see is expectations move away from hours worked or face time. So you're expected to be in the office from 9 to 5, or informally, you're expected to stay until right after the boss leaves. I think that's a very old school sort of FaceTime thing that, no joke, happened when I worked in advertising. Like as soon as our boss left, we all packed up and left too. So it's going to shift from hours worked, hours involved in a opportunity to expectations around what done looks like. And, did you clearly define the success metrics? Were you able to then get the proper success metrics on the project? Were you able to clearly hold yourself accountable for the deliverables of this project? And so focusing more on the output rather than the input and setting expectations around that output is going to be the biggest shift. What then is really challenging, like I'm not going to lie, like this is very challenging for leadership teams, is to take that output and build it back up to a performance management system that has very specific competencies or skills that a successful employee at their company needs. Because it's not about just getting the projects done. It's not about just sitting at your chair and getting the work done in an office. It's, did the culmination of the 3 projects you worked on in the last 6 months show to us that you have strong written communication skills, because that's important in our organization? Did it show us that you're able to effectively manage, conflict in a remote organization and be able to build bridges with people virtually? Or was there tension in your Zoom meetings? And how do you get that feedback from people and be able to share that appropriately? And so I think leaders will have to think about how and why they want to promote people, and not just promote people because of, again, tenure or things related to some existence of time.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for answering that. I hope, Danny, you got the answers you were looking for. All right. We're slowly closing on time, but we have a few last 2 questions that we wanted to cover with you. We were talking about creating, how do you get started actually with creating a people first culture. So Ali, what would be your recommendations to the teams that are looking to, that are probably already made the shift, feel like we've pretty much all made the shift, but are ready to take the next step and really start investing in some of the areas we were mentioning?
Yeah. So where to get started? Don't be afraid to ask the dangerous questions. Like, make sure that there is a sense of vulnerability based trust where people can truly state what works for them. Once you have that base level of trust, get to know the people on your team. So I've seen a few examples in the chat are things that I have actually done in previous organizations as well. So I'm super excited that people gave these examples because I think they are starting to be the best practices in remote work, but some sort of personal user guide or expectations and overview of how each person in a team works, what their preferences are. In the book that's coming out, we show this as like a Mad Libs exercise for people to fill in like adjectives related to, this is when I feel the most energetic at work. This is when I need heads down time. This is how I prefer feedback, or this is the cadence of meetings I can have in one day before I feel like my brain is going to explode, et cetera, et cetera. At the last company I consulted for, Oyster, which is an HR enablement platform, we had a Notion that had each person in there with their own pictures of like them working and their like what their desk setup looks like, and information about what they like to do outside of work, as well as like what their top priorities and what team they worked at internally was. So I think the more you can have things to help people get to know each other, not just in terms of the work they're doing, but who they are as a person, that it'll really support some of the things that we talked about today, as well as clearly identifying what people work on internally. So another great tool we had at DuckDuckGo was a list of DRIs, or directly responsible individuals. And so there would be things like who's responsible for swag, who's responsible if there's a bug on the website, and everybody would be listed. So you kind of knew all of the different areas of the organization and who owned what. So I think those are some good examples for getting to know everybody. Then after you've gotten to know everybody a little bit, it's about, going through that creative tension and working through it. I love the idea of creating a team charter. And so the way that basically works is once everybody has their individual preferences laid out, you get a chance to get to know everybody. You work together for a few weeks, you sit down and you write a team charter of this is the expectations of how our team is going to collaborate. And like, if there is tension or a conflict, like the first step is those two people, get on a Zoom call. If that can't get resolved, then X, Y, Z. Or, we choose to have 2 team meetings a month. One is optional and it's like a 30-minute social thing. The other one is less optional and it's an hour where we're going to choose a topic and we're going to learn something that's like skill development for everybody. And that's something that I led as a format for team meetings when I managed a team of 5 distributed people. And that serves both needs, the needs for people who do feel that isolation, needs for people that don't really care, want less meetings, but still have a desire for professional growth and personal development. So mixing things up for both parties in the team is incredibly important, and having that charter documented as well. So you can, go back and reflect. These are the things we agreed on. Are they still working for us? Are they not? Let's have that feedback loop and continue to iterate and build on culture. And I know it sounds boring, but make sure the baseline of everything we talked about is done first. If there's task friction at work, if people aren't getting you deliverables, if people are struggling with setting expectations, no one's going to want to spend extra time doing the fun stuff of culture. And so I think it's really important as a manager that you build that base so then you can, get a fancy roof.
Absolutely. And, going back to some of the examples you shared with, creating a list of, directly responsible people, or even sharing what your office or space looks like. I think that's sort of like creating the virtual office space, right? Being kind of closer to each other and knowing where to find the right person in this virtual space that I'm working in. And also, creating, somebody mentioned here that they have like a user manual for their employees, which I think is a another really, really great tool. And we also talked about this, as like having a people kickoff, right? Having like a team guide or even an employee bio to understand how does your colleague like to spend their free time, but also what's their work schedule like, right? Are they productive in the morning? Do they like to chat with other employees on Slack in the afternoons? Knowing those little things can be extremely helpful when creating, the culture where everybody can sort of know what to expect and how to collaborate, how to communicate. And we also talked a lot about psychological safety, which I would love to open as one of the final questions here. How do you think, Ali, you can start creating better psychological safety as a remote team leader? How do you promote that for your employees?
I think that's a great question. I think psychological safety means different things to different people. And so it kind of ties into the first bit is really putting in the effort to intentionally getting to know the people on your team without the fear of consequences. And so I think that there's two different approaches there. And it's really useful to know a question that I used to like to ask people I managed, and it seems kind of weird and theoretical, but I think can offer a gauge of psychological safety is, do you assume trust in someone until they break your trust? Or are you the type of person that someone needs to earn your trust before you are able to move forward? Because I think most people fall into one of those two camps. And both of them show different ways of getting psychological safety. So I'm a firm believer in this idea of vulnerability-based trust. If you can be authentic, if you can be vulnerable about the things going on in your life, then you're able to create trust. And even for people that don't like to share personal things, they can, one, be vulnerable in that, hey, I don't really love to talk about my personal self at work. I'm here for a job. I want to do a good job. I want to be engaged. You can still talk about vulnerabilities. And I had an example where I had been a very fast-paced digital nomad. So I was traveling and working full-time, leading an HR team of 5 people distributed around the world. I would spend 3 weeks in Asia and then travel and spend like 6 weeks in Mexico. Dealing with those time changes and the jet lag was rough. And I know it was my decision. I felt very grateful to be there. But even to share that vulnerability with my team wasn't necessarily, too personal, but just like, hey, I just landed in a different time zone and I'm struggling getting all my deliverables done this week because I've just been, more exhausted than I'm used to. And we have 5 new people starting this week, and I want to prioritize their experience rather than this longstanding project going on, shows a prioritization vulnerability that I had with my team that made me more relatable and gave them the safe space needed to open up psychologically about the things going on with their work life as well. And so from a leadership standpoint, it's sharing your own vulnerabilities. Don't be afraid to go first. And create the space to ask questions. Ask your people how much they feel comfortable sharing personally or not. It could be something as simple as if someone had, and this was someone that I used to manage, and we used to do one-on-ones, and they had all these figurine action figures in their background. And it was like, you know what, we don't need to talk about stuff too personal, but why don't you tell me about your passion for these superheroes? Where did that come from? And even those small icebreakers and getting the other person talking can create that rapport needed to then start asking more difficult questions around, how are you feeling in terms of an anxiety level? A question I always would ask is what are you excited about? What are you anxious about this week? And people could give you whatever answer they felt comfortable with, but knowing that you're asking them what they feel anxious or stressed about is another opportunity for them to feel safe speaking up.
Definitely. And I think, we talked about this little in our previous chats, having the psychological safety means that you're able to bring your whole self to work if you want to. You can set the boundaries however you like, but you have the ability and you don't need to, and you have the opportunity to give feedback or to ask for help when you need it. And this is actually the very last topic of our chat today, which is, how to sort of set the employee experience versus the life experience of your teams, which I think is extremely difficult topic that, if we had a whole hour to talk about,
we would talk just about this.
Exactly. But Ali, you shared some great tips with me when we talked about this together. So I thought we could quickly run through them. What are the few ways how you can, kind of promote, the psychological safety at work, and also, help your employees to really feel secure and, bring their whole self to work.
Yeah, and I think this may have changed since the last time we talked, because this is always a topic that's so top of mind for me. Mm-hmm. People spend so much time thinking about the employee experience in terms of, cultivating opportunities to spend time with people at work. But there's not a lot of thought that I can see about being really intentional around what is the experience of the employee in their whole life now that we're blurring the lines between life and work by having people work remotely. And how do we make sure that our employees are safe and healthy and happy in their communities, knowing that that benefit will trickle back down to the company. And so some things that I think about is, you talk a lot about employee isolation at work and being connected to your colleagues and having friends at work. Of course, there's proven benefits that that's beneficial, but how are managers or HR teams, people ops people cultivating experiences for people to not feel isolated where they live? And so something like having a day where you don't have any meetings, and it's across your team, no meetings that day. So if you wanted to go and co-work or have lunch with friends outside in your local community, that you're able to do that. And not only are you able to do that, but it's like being promoted within your team because it's a dedicated day where there's no meetings. And then you could come back with your team and kind of share pictures of what you all did on your no meeting day. Like, where's a cool place you worked from? Did you have like a nice time, like picking your kid up from school early or going outside for a long walk? So being able to really cultivate time to spend with people outside of work as well as inside work, I think is really important. Allowing people the space to figure out what lifestyle works for them in terms of where their energy comes from when they work. Are they a morning person? Do they prefer working in the afternoon? Where did they get those peaks of productivity and how can they cultivate their day around that? For me, the most rewarding thing in my life is going to boot camp 3 times a week. And I schedule those before I schedule anything professionally. Because I know it's going to give me the energy to get through my work the rest of the day. And it's something that I'm investing in the health of myself. And the healthier I am, the better my work output will be, the better it will be for the companies that I contribute to. And so I think supporting people in that way and helping them figure out their energy levels and approaching work from an energetic point of view is really important as well. Absolutely. And then all of the stuff that's on this slide.
Yeah, definitely. We talked a lot about inspiring creativity. And I think that again comes from, giving your team a few hours a day to breathe, right? Not to have this like rigorous schedule of having, morning check-ins, lunch check-ins, weekly, evening wrap-ups and so on, and actually giving them the space to be creative and sort of go deep into work and, figure out something new, or even giving them, hack days where they have a few hours a day just to think about new ideas. I think that can be very energetic, especially if you if you don't have colleagues from your company in your local town or in the area where you live, and you're sort of, again, alone in your remote experience, it can be great to sort of be encouraged to, go out there and discover and conquer and come back with what you have created or what ideas you're bringing to the table. So, yeah. Ali, thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom with us today. I believe we could talk about every single of those slides for a really long time. So I'm really happy we had the chance to get through everything. So I just wanted to quickly put Ali's LinkedIn here in case anybody wants to follow her or connect with her. She's been sharing a lot of amazing information on her LinkedIn. I'm pretty sure you'll be soon sharing more info about your upcoming book, which we're all really excited about. So it was so great to have you today.
Yes, thanks so much for having me. And yeah, if anyone wants to connect, please do. I love having chats, and you can see some more of the beautiful beaches that I get to look at when I work. as well as hear a little bit more about the struggle. So I'm excited to share both the good and the bad with y'all moving forward.
Amazing. Well, again, so great to have you. And I'll see everyone on our networking tables if you feel like chatting with us for a few more minutes.
Thank you, everybody, for your time.
All right. See you there.